To begin our preventative maintenance inspection, we're going to test the starter operation. We start with a light check. Test all warning and gauge lights for operation, and check for burnt-out bulbs. Turn on lights and walk around truck to make sure all are working and functioning properly. First, we will check for marker lights on top. Then look down and check signal lights, headlights, and high beams. Be sure to check turning signal lights on both sides. Also check to make sure your rear lights are functional. Check the rear signal lights to make sure they are flashing, and make sure the license plate is properly lit. Now have another individual get behind the driver's seat and check to make sure brake lights properly function. Also check the reverse light. Check the rear to make sure your mud flaps are properly in place and have reflective tape. We now get in the cab to test the starter operations. First, turn the ignition key to make sure it starts properly. Now look for any check engine lights. These lights may be lit and will indicate a problem that may need to be addressed. In this particular truck, if an engine light were lit, it would be in this area here. We will now check that all cabin lights are operational. Check that the radio is functioning properly. Check that the seat can be adjusted and then locked into place. Then check that the seatbelt works and connects correctly. Check that the steering wheel is functioning properly. Check the city horn, then check the highway horn. Check the operation of the air conditioner and heater and defroster. Also make sure it's blowing properly. Check windshield for cracks or damage. Then check the wiper blades. Then check to see if you have wiper blade fluid. To check for any air leaks, shut down the engine, touch the brake, then push in the yellow brake and listen for any air leaks while you're still pressing down the brakes. Check the onboard fire extinguisher to make sure it's functioning properly. Make sure the indicator shows that it is in the green and it will be ready if needed and properly charged. Check to make sure the emergency triangles are in place. Find this box inside the cab. Take out the triangles and make sure they work properly in case your vehicle is stopped on the road. Make sure all 3 triangles are provided. This will provide extra safety. Now we're going to check the 7-way light cord with the 7-way tester. We take out the 7-way plug and connect it to this tester. This test allows us to see that all the lights on the trailer are working. The blinking lights indicate that your signal lights are working properly. Now bring the device to the front of the cab to check all your signal lights and brake lights. Check all the lights one at a time. Hands are in good shape. We will now check that these rubber-sealed grommets for glad hands are in good shape. You need to check the glad hand and the rubber inside the grommet. You're checking the grommets that are used inside the glad hands. If they are cracked or worn out, they need to be replaced. Next, check fuel tank straps. Check the metal straps for rusting, wear, and tear, and make sure they're not broke. Make sure the rubber is not worn down underneath. Also check the bottom and underneath on both sides. Now we need to open the hood.
So now we're going to open up the hood. If this was a Freightliner, the locking should be here on the side and inside of the hood. Since this is a Mack, the Mack keeps it in the bottom where we pull back.
The first thing to check is the power steering fluid. Remove the measuring stick and clear off the markings on the stick. This will show you the proper measurements for the minimum amount of power steering fluid and the maximum amount of power steering fluid, and that it is properly full.
Now we're going to check the belts. We're going to make sure that they're intact, they're not cracked, they don't show a lot of wear, and we're going to check the tensioner by just pulling on it.
Now it's time to check the tires. First, we check the tire walls for any markings or cuts or bubbles or damage. Now we need to check the tire treads. To do this, we will use a tread depth measuring tool. This is used to measure the threads of the tires. Simply push down on the top of the tool and place it in the tire tread. If it measures in the red, the tire legally has to be replaced. If it reads yellow, you are cautioned to change the tire, and green, the tire is still good. These current measurements meet the legal limits, so the tire does not need to be replaced. It is critical that every tread on the tire be measured one at a time. That is the only way to determine whether the tire can be continuously used. Measure every single tread to make sure all your tires are compliant. Check the air pressure in all tires. We will now need to use our tire pressure gauge. Simply press the tire pressure gauge into the valve stem. On the other end of the gauge, the tire pressure will pop out. This one reads 100 pounds. This is the correct tire pressure. Now we need to check the brakes. First, we need to check the brake wear indicator.
To find the indicator, we're going to go behind the tire, right near the brake caliper. This is the brake wear indicator.
The brake wear indicator, as shown here, indicates the different stages of wear.
You could see the different stages of wear from here to the second one, to the third one, and the fourth. Once it reaches to this part here, it's telling me that the brake pads are worn out. When it reaches at the end of this indicator, it's letting us know that it needs to be replaced. Yes. These are brake drums and brake shoes.
Also check behind the tire the brake drums and brake shoes. Check to make sure there are no cracks. Now we check the alternator.
Now we're going to check the alternator. We're going to visually check it, make sure that there are no missing bolts, that the brackets are not broken.
Using your hand, move it around to make sure there is no play and that nothing is loose. Just below the alternator is your AC compressor. Check again to make sure there are no missing bolts and that the brackets are not broken. Put your hands in to try and move it to make sure there is no play. Make sure it is nice and tight and nothing is loose.
So now we're on the other side of the truck and we're going to inspect the coolant tank to make sure there are no leaks, that the cap is tight. So we're looking for any signs of any leaks as we work our way down.
We are looking for signs of any leaks as we work our way down. Checking to see if there are any leaks between the filter and the housing. This red can is the coolant filter. This should be changed once a year. Next, we're going to check the air filter. First, take off the air filter cover. All you need to do is unfasten the 4 clamps that hold the cover down. Take the filter out, visually inspect it to make sure it is clean. To place the air filter back in correctly, simply line up this notch here.
Okay, now we're going to check the rear tires and we're going to check the walls to make sure that there are no cuts and no bubbles. We're also going to check the top of the tire.
Using again the tread depth measuring tool, you must check the depth of every single tire. Now we need to check the air in the rear tires.
To check the air pressure for the front tire, the valve is here in the front, the valve stem. For this inside tire, we're going to look for the valve stem in between the holes here. In between these holes, and we find this one right over here.
This one reads 100 pounds. This is the correct tire pressure. Now we need to do a brake inspection on the rear tires.
So we're by the tires and we're going to do the inspection in the rear of the tire, where we're going to do the same in inspecting the brakes, and then we're going to inspect that there are no visual signs of any oil leaks behind it.
Check to make sure there are no cracks in the brake drums or brake shoes.
After you visually see that there are no leaks, then you move on to these U-bolts.
Okay.
What we do is we get under and we inspect them to see that all bolts are there intact. Then we could grab a hammer and just tap them. So I'm tapping them to see if there's any movement on the U-joint.
Now comes time to check the oil in the tractor.
We need to check the oil on the differential, that it's full. To do that, we're going to remove this plug. And once the plug is removed, you could see if you could put your finger in it to make sure that the oil is right on the rim of that plug. If it's not, we need to add oil. Just put an oil inside. You get like a funnel, and it has to be leveled with the hole, with the plug.
Now we need to check the fifth wheel on the back of the trailer.
So now we're going to check the fifth wheel. To do that, we use this tool that simulates the kingpin on the bottom of the trailer. And what we're going to do is we're going to place it on the fifth wheel and we're going to push it in and we're going to look for those jaws to close. If you see there, it's closed, so the kingpin is locked. Now we're going to remove it by releasing it and pulling it out. Okay, so now we're going to grease up the fifth wheel, and there are a couple of greasing fittings here on the side of the fifth wheel, and what we want to do is we want to grease them up to minimize wear. There's one fitting here. I'm going to pump it with grease. Then there's another one here.
There are 4 fittings on either side of the fifth wheel. They all must be filled with grease. We are now greasing up the fifth wheel. This is vital to reduce wear and tear. This will minimize friction between the fifth wheel and the plate of the trailer.
Now we're going to check the batteries on the truck, which are located underneath the cab on the driver's side. We're going to turn off the main power switch. Now we're going to remove the battery cover to this. There are 2 latches here on the bottom, and we're going to pick it up and remove it. Now we're going to visually check the batteries to make sure that there is no corrosion on these posts. We'll also remove these plates. We're going to take these off, these nuts, and we're going to clean them with a wire brush to remove any corrosion that could be within the terminals.
This here is similar to the battery that you would use in the truck. Once we check for corrosion, we want to check the voltage of the battery to make sure it is properly powered. Using this battery tester, we now connect the charging clamps to the battery, but we must make sure to connect to the proper polarity. Black is for ground, red is for positive. Press the load button, which will cause a simulation of the battery being hooked up to the truck. As we can see here, we have proper voltage in the yellow. The reading on the indicator reads yellow, which still reflects that the battery is usable and does not need to be charged.
Now we're back in the front of the truck and we're going to check drag link and pitman arm. The drag link and the pitman arm, so there is no movement. So we're going to turn this side to side, which is perfectly fine if it moves a little bit. We're going to turn it like a motorcycle, and we're going to move it up and down to make sure that it's stiff and it's not, and then sturdy, and there is no movement. Now we're going to check the U-bolts on the front. We're going to do the same as we did in the rear. So we're going to tap them to make sure that there is no movement. We could also get underneath it and make sure that the bolts are still in place. We do this on both sides. Now we're going to check the tie rod ends. Now we're going to put this crowbar underneath it, and we're going to apply downward pressure on the crowbar, and we're going to look for movement on the tie rod end. If it moves up and down, then it must be replaced.
We are now going under the truck to drain the oil. The location of the drain plug does vary, depending on the model of the truck, but it is not difficult to find. Simply remove this plug and drain all the oil out. The oil should be collected in an oil drain pan. Now comes time to refill the motor with oil, located under the front hood. Unscrew and put in the oil. Trailers and engines are different, so please refer to your manual to see how much oil is needed. After filling with oil, pull out the dipstick, clean it, and place it back in. Make sure it is all the way back in, and then take it out to make sure you can read the dipstick indicator. This notch is for minimum oil. This notch is for maximum. The oil filters for this Mack truck are located on the passenger side underneath the engine.
Keep a reminder that every engine model will have the filters placed in different locations and different amounts of filters. So for the Macks and the Volvos, generally will be on this side. To change them, you could just use one of these. We're going to place the tool on the filter, and we're going to turn it to loosen it up, removing the filter. There's a typical oil filter. Now, before we place them back into the motor, we're going to fill them up with oil, typically about an inch or so from the top. You're going to dab your finger in some oil, and you're going to put a light coat on top of the seal. before you place it back. You want to fill it up to just around this area here, about an inch from the top. And then it screws right in, hand tight.
The fuel filters are located under the driver's side, under the engine.
These are fuel filters. We're gonna remove this filter exactly the same way with the same tool. On this particular fuel filter, we have to remove the plug, drain it. With that drain plug there, you unscrew it and it just drains down. After it is drained, you could remove it in the same way. Take it out, put in new filters in. This one is the fuel filter. On this one, we want to make sure that we fill it up before placing it back. Fill it up to the top and screw it back on.
Now, also under the front hood, we need to make sure the steering column joint is properly greased. Grease this area right here, and the rest are on the bottom underneath the power steering pump. Now we must go under the truck to find all the grease fittings that need to be filled. We will point out all the fittings that need to be addressed and filled up with grease.
If we work our way down to the pitman arm and into the drag link, there is another one here.
Another one over there.
So then we work our way across, and there's another one right over here. Where my fingers touch it.
Bottom like this, you put it up.
Then we come across to the kingpin. There's one up here. And there is another one on the bottom. Right over here. Now we're going to grease our chassis. We're going to come here on the passenger side. We got 3 points. One up here. One down here. And back in the tie rod, we have another one. We're going to apply oil. Placing our grease gun into the fitting.
Now we need to check the
we get on a
transmission
creeper
oil indicator.
And
Grab a creep,
we work our
roll
way
under the truck,
to the
working
transmission.
your way up to the transmission.
On this particular model, the transmission has little sight glass there, and we just check to see that it has oil in it. Make sure that the oil level is up to the top. Oil is halfway or low, then we need to replace it.
We will now start the truck. Make sure the front hood is still open. We will now walk around the front of the truck to check for any leaks.
Now we're going to close the hood on the Volvos and Max. We need to put it on the upright position to close the latch, enabling us to close the hood.
After passing inspection, before the truck can hit the road, it needs the PM or the preventative maintenance sticker filled out. Fill out the date it was done and the mileage. Then fill out the date it is due to be checked again and that mileage. You then place it in the upper left-hand corner of the inside of your truck's windshield. Maintenance is critical. It keeps drivers on the road so they can make money. And it also saves lives. Make sure your truck gets its preventative maintenance.